Morning, everyone. Let's get started. So today we're going to talk about disaster recovery as a service. A little quick introduction. My name is David Lagumbai. I am the solutions engineer with RapidScale. Today we're going to be presenting a presentation on disaster recovery as a service with our partner Zerto. So real quick, a couple things. And Christian, if you can go to the next slide. This will be recorded, so if anyone couldn't make it or if you joined late, just let your colleagues know that it'll be on our partner portal within the 24 hours. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to send it in the chat window below, and we will get to that at the end of the presentation. Today we have two of our colleagues from Zerto, Christian Von Tresco and Donald Farrell. He's a solutions engineer, and Christian's a cloud sales manager. So here's a quick agenda of what we're going to cover today. We're going to have an intro of Zerto, understanding of the DRaaS market, some use cases, a short demo of Zerto, understanding the competition as well. So real quick, what is Zerto? Zerto is an enterprise class disaster recovery and business continuity software. So here at RapidScale, it's what we lead with on our disaster recovery as a service product, our cloud recovery product, as we call it. And basically, this is a way to replicate virtual machines of the customers wherever they're located, whether it be in RapidScale's data center or on-premise, and replicating to any of RapidScale's data center, the customer's choice. So it could be East Coast, West Coast, or in the middle, in the central. And this is going to provide that application a lower recovery time objective, which we'll cover later. Basically, if a customer has an operation and they need to be up and running within hours, this is what you need. You need a disaster recovery as a service solution. And so, business and will not be interrupted. You can have a business continuity plan with this product. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christian and Donald.
Thank you so much, David. This is Christian. As David mentioned, my name is Christian Von Tresco. I'm the cloud sales manager here with Zerto. And my primary responsibility at Zerto is working with cloud service providers like RapidScale who are leveraging Zerto to deliver a service. So David, really appreciate you inviting us to participate today. So really quickly, a little background about Zerto for those of you who might be unfamiliar with us. Let's start off with the name. It's a fairly unusual name. It's actually a play on words. It's a combination of the words zero and RTO. RTO standing for recovery time objective, a very important concept when looking into DR. So if you sandwich those two words together, you get Zerto. We were established in 2009. We have dual headquarters in both Boston and Israel. All of our sales and operations is out of Boston. All of our development is overseas. Donald and I are based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our first product release was Zerto Virtual Replication 1.0. We were actually unveiled on the floor of VMworld that year in 2011, where we took home Best of Show and VMworld Gold, so top honors. And we've really continued that trajectory ever since. We have well over 600 employees, and we've doubled our revenue and customer base year over year since inception as well. So who needs disaster recovery? Well, for me, the answer is simple: everybody. And I like this statement right here because it's very short and sweet. It's a statement by the University of Texas. There's probably dozens of different statements that are very similar to this one, but I typically use this one in my presentation, especially in light of what's been happening in Texas lately. I just think it's very relevant. So nearly half the companies that lose their data due to a disaster never reopen, and 90% are out of business within 2 years. So I've been heavily involved in the disaster recovery community and practices for around 8 years now. And I would say when I originally got started in disaster recovery, it was more akin to, life insurance, right? A complete luxury, a nice to have, but I think you would be hard pressed to find the majority of organizations that had a robust DR strategy in place. That has completely changed over the last 5 or 6 years. I would consider disaster recovery akin to health insurance, where you would really be foolish not to have it these days. Outages and downtime have become, headline-making events. If Amazon's down, that's on, USA Today tomorrow. So I think organizations have really come to the conclusion that not having a robust DR strategy in place these days is really rolling the dice with the future of your business. I personally can't think of too many businesses where data isn't the key focus of their business or isn't absolutely necessary to conducting day-to-day operations. So in my opinion, these are conversations that we should be having with every organization that we interact with. a little bit more about the size of the market and where we're going here over the next few years. It's absolutely exploding, right? So the stat that I like is on the far right here. 70% of enterprises will pursue a hybrid cloud approach by the end of this year. So this is already happening. Whether or not we're having these conversations with our partners and customers, somebody is, right? And they're definitely moving in this direction. Disaster recovery tends to be one of the most popular ways for an organization to experience a hybrid cloud approach. Typically, DR is something that they don't want to do themselves. And so being able to experience a hybrid cloud approach via disaster recovery has really been a very, very popular means of doing so in the last several years. In terms of market potential, by the end of this year, we'll be coming close to a $3 billion market. And so having had a lot of disaster recovery conversations with small, medium enterprise, I find that having a disaster recovery conversation is often a lot less threatening than having a move your production to the cloud conversation. Typically, when you start having a conversation about moving production resources to the cloud, a lot of times several members of the IT team may be a little bit nervous or apprehensive about what that means in terms of their job security. But typically, disaster recovery is a pain point that they realize they're not able to meet themselves. And so you're really addressing a pain point that they're eager to talk to. So for me, as somebody that's been in the sales in the field for quite a long time, approaching organizations to talk disaster recovery is a great, great way and often very, very much less threatening than production conversations. I love this Forrester survey because I think it really opens a lot of people's eyes to the types of events that are causing downtime, right? I think historically, most people associate downtime with Mother Nature. So whether it's hurricanes, flooding, et cetera. But let's be honest, for most of us, depending on the part of the country we're in, those aren't really valid concerns. So when I look at this slide, it really points to the fact that natural disasters are really a very small percentage of the actual downtime causing events. By far, the most leading causes of downtime are mundane operational failures that we all are exposed to. So you can see here on the far left in the light blue, at 43%, by far the most leading causes of downtime is an operational failure due to power, right? And power is something that we all need in every one of our data centers. Right behind that is IT hardware failure, and then network failure closely behind that. If you move over to the far right in the orange, the leading cause there is human error, right? But in the middle, all those things, hurricane, floods, winter storms, those are all far less than the ones that I previously mentioned. So in my opinion, this is really enlightening. It goes to show that most organizations are simply exposed to these just by day-to-day operations. And if you look to the right here, this same survey now highlights the ramifications of this downtime. What are these effects of downtime on the organization? And you can see here by far and away at 72%, the biggest ramification is employee productivity. The reality is people can't do their jobs without the IT infrastructure, right? If Exchange goes down, most likely people aren't going to break out typewriters. They're simply going to twiddle their thumbs until Exchange is back up and they're able to communicate again. So loss of employee productivity is by far the largest there. One that I'm surprised isn't a little bit higher is damage to corporate reputation. As I mentioned earlier, downtime is now headlines, right? So if your organization has an outage, your customers and potential customers are going to be very aware of it in a very short period of time. And they don't forget, right? So when that contract negotiation comes up or they're evaluating other providers, they're most definitely going to remember, unfortunately, the negative parts of the partnership versus the 364 days of uptime. So this slide right here highlights the most common use cases that we've worked with the RapidScale team to support. I'll move through these very quickly, but these are all use cases that you should think of RapidScale and Zerto on when you come across them in the field. Far and away, the most basic use case that we support amongst our service provider community is migrations. It's just a byproduct of one thing that Zerto does really, really well, and that's moving workloads from point A to point B. Now, obviously, we hope the customer chooses to continue to use Zerto for long-term protection once those virtual machines are in their new homes, but we realize that's not always the case. So migrations are a very simple use case for us, but very powerful as it allows the customer to experience the ease of use and power of Zerto. And we very often find that a migration leads to long-term protection. By far, the two biggest use cases that we've worked with RapidScale to support are disaster recovery as a service and inter-cloud disaster recovery. The only difference between those two definitions is where the source site environment is located. So typically when we start interacting with service providers, the initial audience that they're concerned in addressing is their existing customer base. These are customers that may already have a production presence at a world-class RapidScale facility, and now RapidScale is simply looking to offer them disaster recovery to an additional RapidScale facility. So intercloud is typically a very common early use case for us. But far and away, the biggest use case for RapidScale, and really most providers that are out there right now, is disaster recovery as a service. And this is where a customer, instead of spending a tremendous amount of CapEx investment in building out a secondary data center that, knock on wood, they may never use, instead they'll choose to point at RapidScale, consume some very cost-effective target disk, some licensing on a per VM basis, maybe a little reserve compute, and obviously fully managed by professionals who do this on a day-to-day basis. So DR as a service is absolutely one of the biggest markets out there right now, and it's one of probably the biggest buzzwords in IT. Absolutely a focus for the RapidScale Zerto partnership. So what makes Zerto special and unique? So not to get into a history lesson here, but historically speaking, most of the disaster recovery options that were available to our customers were based in the wrong place. They were physical-based solutions. They were based in the SAN layer. So they were NetApp to NetApp, EMC to EMC, compellent to compellent. And this was problematic for multiple reasons, but one of the biggest has to be vendor lock-in. So at the last VMworld I attended, there were over 89 different storage vendors present. Obviously, an organization like RapidScale wants to market DR as a service to a wide audience without being concerned which one of these 89 different storage vendors they're choosing to back end. And so at Zerto, by moving the replication up into the hypervisor, meaning we interact and integrate directly with vCenter if it's a VMware customer, or System Center if it's a Microsoft customer, we are now allowing this to be a storage agnostic solution. This means that when you go out to talk to your customers, you don't have to be concerned with what type of storage they're currently leveraging or what type of storage they may choose to leverage in the future. The same goes for RapidScale. So we are a storage agnostic solution, which really has allowed RapidScale to go to market and have these types of conversations with all their customers without being concerned about what type of storage they've chosen to leverage. Extremely, extremely powerful. So this is probably one of the most important slides that we'll review before the demo. These are the most important components or building blocks of Zerto. I know we only have a short period of time, so I'll walk through these quickly, but you can definitely find more in-depth information on our website. On the upper left and on the upper right in purple, you'll see larger blocks with the letters ZVM. The ZVM stands for the Zerto Virtual Manager. It's a very lightweight Windows appliance that interacts and integrates directly with vCenter. So primarily the ZVM is the interface, the GUI. This is where your customers will go in, create the replication jobs, monitor the health of those jobs. Anything regarding failover or failover tests would be done through the Zerto Virtual Manager. But even more importantly than serving as the primary management console, the Zerto Virtual Manager serves as a looking glass for Zerto into the local environment that we're looking to protect. So by integrating directly with vCenter or System Center, we're going to get some really, really important information about the environment your customer is looking to protect. We're going to get an inventory of hosts, virtual machines that sit on those hosts, data stores that are associated with those machines, virtual networks, etc. It's essentially giving us a blueprint of the environment that we would be looking to protect. Obviously, in this scenario that you're seeing on my screen, your customer would only be concerned about the installation of the ZVM on the production side. Obviously, in terms of the DR side, RapidScale has all that in place. Below the ZVM on each side, you'll see smaller red, purple blocks with the letters VRA. The VRA stands for the Virtual Replication Appliance. It's a very lightweight Linux appliance that's installed on a per ESXi host basis. Now, Zerto is a virtual aware solution. Our customers have made a substantial investment in solutions like VMware because they want to take advantages of features like HA, vMotion, DRS, etc. And so as those virtual machines move around to different hosts within your customer's local environment, as long as Zerto has a VRA installed on that host, we will continue to replicate and protect those machines uninterrupted. When I say lightweight, the initial resources required by the VRA are only 1 vCPU, 3 gigs of RAM, and 13 gigs of disk space. As you can see in the middle here, we do recommend a 5 meg bandwidth connection. Obviously, that's one of the major significant advantages of leveraging a provider like RapidScale. They have redundant gig, 10 gig, and probably far above that now in and out of their facility. So typically, in a RapidScale scenario, the bandwidth restrictions will definitely not be on their side. It's usually outgoing from the customer prem. Although we have worked closely with RapidScale to develop a WAN sizing tool. That way we can definitely determine the amount of WAN that would be needed just for replication purposes. And we're definitely happy to talk more about that later. As you can see here on the upper right, we also mentioned compression and throttling. So some unique traffic shaping features that are built into the product. So before any workloads are sent from the source site to the DR site at RapidScale, we are leveraging LZ4 compression. That will result in some significant WAN savings. And then we also have throttling built into the product. So if your customer has 20 megs of outgoing bandwidth they need to support their day-to-day operations, and they're worried about the effect that Zerto replication might have on those day-to-day operations, they can tell Zerto that between the hours of 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever those relevant business hours may be, you only want Zerto to have access to 5 or 10 megs of that available 20 for replication purposes. A very simple, basic feature, but something I see the majority of our customers taking advantage of. This slide here is very similar to the previous slide, but this represents the replication workflow. So I quickly wanted to highlight what's actually happening here behind the curtain. So as the virtual machines are writing to the underlying storage, and as you can see here, we have a lot of different storage vendors, so we're storage agnostic. As those virtual machines are writing to the underlying storage, Zerto is copying those writes in real time to the local in-memory resources of the VRA, where those workloads are compressed with LZ4 compression and then sent across the wire to the secondary site at RapidScale. So once again, as those virtual machines are writing to the underlying storage, Zerto is copying those writes in real time to the local in-memory resources of the VRA. Those workloads are compressed with LZ4 compression and then sent across the wire to the secondary site at RapidScale. I like to use analogies, and I would compare the way that Zerto replicates as to a dripping faucet. We're constantly dripping those writes across the wind in real time as they're happening. And that's in, say, comparison to more of a snapshot-based approach, which is more akin to turning on the fire hose once a night at midnight. We are asynchronous block-level replication. There is no impact to the production environment whatsoever. There are no snapshots that Zerto is conducting here. What actually happens when those workloads are sent across to the RapidScale DR site? Fairly straightforward. I'll go through it quickly. The first thing that Zerto creates is a recovery volume or a replica disk that's an exact copy of the source side volume. So pretty straightforward. We're just creating an initial copy of that machine. After that initial copy is created, every new write that is generated from that machine is written to what we call the journal. And this is where we're starting to get into some of the significant advantages and market differentiators for Zerto. Think of the journal as a bookshelf where every book on that bookshelf represents a different point-in-time copy of that application. A lot of guys here at Zerto also like to refer to it as a DVR for your data. And with Zerto, that period lasts from anywhere from 1 hour to 30 days. So within that 30-day window, our customers typically have hundreds, if not thousands, of different point-in-time copies, or what we refer to as checkpoints, of their applications that they can restore from. So far and away, one of the biggest threats to IT these days is ransomware. So in this screenshot here, you can see that perhaps a ransomware attack happens to your organization on May 17th. They encrypt an absolutely critical database at 3:50 in the afternoon. Well, as you can see here within this journal, you can simply roll back to a point-in-time copy of that database at 3:49 and 49 seconds. If for any reason that image is corrupt, you can simply roll back to a previous checkpoint at 3:49 and 19 seconds. The whole idea behind the journal is to absolutely ensure you always have a clean copy of your data to restore from, and to get you as granular of a copy of that data as possible that results in the littlest amount of data loss. You can also see here that we talk about application consistency, which is something that I absolutely feel is overlooked within DR for most organizations. And we address that widely with our concept of a virtual protection group. Think of a virtual protection group as a logical container that you can put virtual machines in that belong together. So a really straightforward example for me would be a 3-tiered web app, where you have a web front end, an app middleware, and a DB back end. In that example, all 3 of those virtual machines come together to perform that application. So in this example, you would want to place all 3 of those virtual machines within the same virtual protection group, the same logical container. That way, if we ever go to restore that application from one of the checkpoints that you see on my screen, all the different virtual machines that compose of that application will restore to the same point in time. I don't know if anybody on this call has had to restore a multi-tiered application with snapshots. They're often conducted at different point in time. It is very painful if it's even achievable. So the concept of virtual protection groups is absolutely a huge differentiator for us. Creating these virtual protection groups is definitely an early part of the setup process that RapidScale helps walk you through. When you do create these virtual protection groups, you absolutely have the ability to prioritize them as high, medium, or low priority. That way, if there ever is bandwidth contention between your 2 sites, Zerto will take whatever bandwidth is available and replicate those highest priority VPDs first. This slide here talks to the automation piece. I want to keep this very short as we're going to go through a quick demo, and I think it's much better to show than to tell this part of our story. But the one thing that I do want to draw your attention to is on the bottom right, where we talk about non-disruptive testing. So in my opinion, testing is one of the most important parts of having a robust DR strategy in place. If you have a DR plan that you haven't tested, you don't have a plan, you have a hope. Right. So at Zerto, we allow for non-disruptive testing. And what this essentially does is Zerto allows you to create a bubble or an isolated test network that is completely isolated from production. This means that you can test your most mission-critical applications in the middle of the day while they're being used by end users. Right. So those days of having to do a DR test on a 3-day weekend in order for recovery, those days are over. You can test your most important applications in the middle of the day while they're used, and your production users will be none the wiser. We even take this a step further that even while you're conducting these tests, Zerto will continue to protect your production environment during that time period. Donald will go into greater detail in just a moment on what this looks like. After conducting a failover or a failover test, you get this really slick recovery report here that you see. And as you can see, it's very, very detailed. On the left, it has really basic information. So the point in time that the test was conducted, the RTO, some basic user notes. But as you go to the right-hand side, it gets quite a bit more detailed, and you can see some very granular recovery steps that were taken to restore this application. So you can see the step description, the result, the start and end times, and the execution times. So if you have customers that are subjected to compliancy or regulatory concerns, some of which are highlighted on the right, this document will speak to them in ways that you have not seen before. So by all means, if you have a customer that is in legal, healthcare, any of these industries where they're subjected to these compliancy concerns, I would absolutely include this slide as part of the presentation. It absolutely resonates each and every time. So I know we mentioned that we talked a little bit on the competitive landscape. Believe me, we could spend an hour on this alone. There's a lot of different products out there right now that sound relatively similar, right? So here we've put together a very basic matrix that compares Zerto Virtual Replication to some of the other products that are out there. Now you can see here that on the next two columns, we call out SRM, and you'll notice that there's two different site recovery manager columns. And you may be thinking, why is Zerto comparing themselves to SRM twice? Well, SRM is definitely one of the products that we run to very often. It's VMware's flagship recovery product. And SRM does a great job at orchestration and automation, but the one thing that SRM doesn't account for is that the actual replication piece. So it's not until you combine SRM with something like array-based replication, which you see here in purple, or vSphere replication that you see here in gray, until you have a complete end-to-end solution. That's why you see it broken out twice here. If you move to the right, you see a lighter gray column that has snapshot-based replication. We're not calling out any technology specific here, but if they're snapshot-based, these things will largely hold true. And then at the last column, we have guest-based replication. So while we may not be calling out replication technology in general, what we are doing is calling out the type of technologies that they're leveraging to support that replication. If you visit our website under the competitive materials section, you can definitely see we have literally dozens and dozens of more specific competitive information as well, if that would be helpful. I love this slide here. Obviously, you can tell I'm very, very passionate about the cloud. I'm a strong believer that in looking at DR, the cloud makes so much sense. And to me, it represents everything that's good about cloud technology, right? So if we look at the top here, you simply get better functionality for less cost. If you're an end user and you're looking at building out a DR site, it's a tremendous capital expense, and it really involves purchasing all the same components that you purchased to build out your production environment. It could be a little bit watered down, but nonetheless, all those same components are involved. So as I mentioned earlier, instead of having this tremendous CapEx investment, instead you can turn it into a very cost-effective monthly recurring expense and have it be fully managed by people that do this on a day-to-day basis. Easy, more frequent, and less expensive testing. I know that RapidScale bakes in one free annual test as part of their program. This is excellent. Your executive team doesn't have to be left wondering if there's a solution in place that actually works. Typically, this test is done upon initial implementation. That way, the organization can rest easy knowing they have a DR solution in place that works. More flexible short-term contracts with fast time to market. This definitely can't be overlooked. If you're looking at implementing a DR strategy, even the most basic act of ordering the hardware itself can take 2 months. With Zerto, you can have Zerto installed and replicating within the same day, depending on your team's availability. So time to market and contractually, no comparison there. And last but not least, pay-as-you-go pricing. So the whole idea here is that you don't have to build out an environment that's going to support 3 years of growth and have a very difficult time justifying that ROI to your CFO in the meantime. With cloud, not only with DR, but just in general, the whole idea behind cloud is paying for resources as you need them, as you use them. So being able to get very flexible, efficient, right? And that's exactly what DR as a service allows you to do. You're only paying for the most absolute critical components during those 90% of the time where you're just replicating, so just storage and licensing. And then should you ever have to stand those workloads up, at that point, you're going to be subjected to those compute costs. So very, very, very cost effective there. So a quick summary here, obviously, enterprise class disaster recovery software, so the ability to protect from 5 VMs up to 5,000 VMs. We're hypervisor based, so if your customer is running a VMware or Microsoft Hyper-V, then we should definitely talk. Storage and hypervisor agnostic, talked about that in great detail at the beginning, essentially critical for RapidScale to be able to roll these services out to their wide audience. Click to test, click to failover, RTO in minutes. So obviously I'll leave that to RapidScale to walk through some of the SLAs that they provide. But under ideal circumstances with Zerto, you can see an RPO in seconds and recovery time measured in minutes. So without further ado, I know I've covered a lot of ground here, and I would love to give Donald, our senior cloud architect, the floor for the next 10 minutes or so. He'll actually walk you through what it looks like to create a virtual protection group and then simulate a quick failover test for us. Donald, the floor is yours, my friend.
All right, I'm going to give him presenter access, but while I am doing that, just remember, you guys, if you have any questions, feel free to chat them over in the questions pane. And Donald, you should be receiving access now.
Awesome, okay. You should be able to see my screen too.
We can see it, you're good.
Cool, awesome, okay. So, again, thanks, Christian. This is what pretty much I would say all of the enterprise virtualized environments in the world look like. This is a VMware environment. If it doesn't look like this, it's probably going to look like this, which is Hyper-V. So obviously with Zerto, we cover the VMware market, and we also cover the Hyper-V market as well. So in my VMware environment here, I've got some fairly heavy duty applications, which will be indicative of the type of business critical applications that your customers will run. For example, you've got SAP, you've got Oracle, you've got SQL Server. And then for the purpose of the demo, I've got a 3 VM application here, which contains a SQL database, a file server, and a web server, which together make up a CRM stack. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how to protect that using Zerto. You'll also see that I have my ZVM, my Zerto management component, and my VRA, my virtual application component here. This is what our interface looks like. So it's very clean and crisp, very intuitive. You can see all your data-driven metrics around RPOs here, which we'll get back to in a second. But in terms of creating a virtual protection group, I'll just go create VPG, call it CRM. I'm going to leave the priority at medium. I'll now select the 3 VMs that make up that application stack, drag and drop them into my protection group. I can define a boot order so that the SQL server comes up first, then the file server, then the web server, and that'll be preserved whenever I do a failover or a failover test. And then I'll select where I want to replicate them to. In the case you're going with RapidScale, most of the heavy lifting will be done for you. So the rule set in terms of which compute, so which host or cluster you want to use within RapidScale, which data store you want to store the VMs on, all of this will be automated for you, so it's even faster when you do this through a service provider. Now, one of the things you can select is the amount of SLA you want. So Zerto allows you to protect, with increments in 1 hour, from anywhere from 1 hour up to 30 days. I'm going to go ahead with 4 hours, which means irrespective of what type of disaster occurs within the last 4 hours, be it a site outage, be it a corruption, be it a ransomware attack, all I need to do is rewind to seconds before that impact occurred, and I'll get back my fully working application on the other side with absolute minimal possible RPO. We also compress the traffic, so that's going to reduce the amount of network you need between the two sites. You can currently see it's around 90% here. Obviously, that's going to be dependent on the types of application you're running, but it's built in. You don't have to couple it with any other products. We're doing the compression for you. The storage, so basically we support replicating to thin provision virtual disks. We also support what are called RDMs, raw device mappings. So we're probably one of the only products who do support replicating native VMDKs or VHDXs if you're a Hyper-V shop, and RDMs at the same time. And again, all you're declaring here is where you want the VMs to land from a storage footprint at the target side. And finally, from a network standpoint, which network do you want the VMs to stand up on when you recover into RapidScale. And if you're doing a failover test, which is basically the non-destructive one we're going to do in a second, you'll probably want to go to an isolated port group so that you don't cause an impact to your production environment, which is still running in your on-premise data center. You can also script things like, firewall rule updates. Any type of additional steps that you need to incorporate into your disaster recovery plan can be scripted here, and Zerto will actually run those scripts for you. And finally, around IP addresses. So a lot of customers, they have a certain IP address when the VM is living in production, and they might want to change that to a different one when it actually moves into the recovery site. Again, the whole point here is that you declare what the IP is. Zerto will automatically change it for you as part of the protection plan recovery process. And that's pretty much it. So all you've done here is you declared a couple of rules around which VMs you want to replicate, the settings that you're going to incorporate to them when they recover to the target side. And once you press done, you'll start to see these green boxes showing up. Each one of these is a replicated virtual protection group or application, if you will. I've got 15 of these encompassing 24 VMs, 7 seconds RPO, which means that if I lost my entire site, the average data loss metric when I fail over to the target site will be 7 seconds. So if you compare that with a traditional snapshot-based approach, whereby most people are actually recovering to last night's backup, you're talking about, 24 hours versus 7 seconds. So the cost impact there is, going to be different for each customer, but it's going to be substantial. In terms of visibility, so one of the things I like from Zerto is that we're giving you all the metrics from a single pane of glass. Kristen touched on some of the competitive products where you have to couple together, 3, 4, 5 solutions to get a working BCDR plan. With Zerto, you can click on the VM screen. It tells you all of your replication and SLA metrics. You can see it from a VPG basis, which is more indicative of what the whole application is doing. If I click on this CRM app I just replicated here, you'll see that it's currently meeting the SLA. You can see the current and historical stats, performance metrics, the VM settings, a virtual infrastructure map showing your on-premise environment and your RapidScale environment, and the SLA metrics here. So again, imagine trying to get all of this information from 4 different products. By the time you're finished getting it from product A, it's out of date in product B. So just to finish off, guys, in terms of a failover, I'm going to do first the failover test, which is the non-destructive, prove out what a DR event would look like. So I click the failover button down here. You can see it toggles between live and test. I'm going to go ahead and do a test. Select one or more VPGs. I'm going to do them all. Boot order we've configured will be preserved, as will any type of scripts in ReIP. And here's the really cool stuff. So you can actually say, if I got hit with a ransomware attack, my data is encrypted. I don't know when the ransomware attack happened. I know it happened somewhere in the last 4 hours. So I'm going to go back through these and find out which one the data is not encrypted on. And then I'm going to do a failover to that point in time. So whichever checkpoint you choose here, and here's the list of them, all VMs in the same group will instantiate from the same second in time. So it's very hard to do this outside of Zerto because we're the only product who does this cross-VM consistency in a software-only configuration. Start the failover test. Now again, you'll see the runbook, the running tasks here. At the source side, no impact, everything's hunky-dory over here. The VMs are still doing their thing, users are connected, doing work. At the target side, so in RapidScale, you can see we spun up a point-in-time copy of each VM. As of that point in time, we append testing recovery to the name. This is actually on an isolated port group, so we're not causing duplicate IP or any type of impact to the production environment. And now the really cool stuff starts. So we can actually launch a console to the VM. And instead of just proving out a DR event, maybe you want to do things like test an application upgrade. So you don't want to risk installing the latest Oracle patches in production. Do a failover test, install them there. If it works, then you know it's okay to install those patches in production. If it doesn't work, well, then you're not carrying this information back into production. You can just throw it away and test the newer patches after that. Now, while this test is running, we're still protecting the source environment. So there's no gap in SLA when you're doing a test. And as Christian said, we've only spawned the compute over here when we're doing the failover test. So once you click on stop here, it's going to go ahead and shut down those VMs. You're going to be able to put in some notes for your auditing, whether it worked or not, success or failure. That'll shut down the VMs at the target site. So you're back to just replicating into storage. Here's a recovery report. So you've got the holistic level events over here. So which user did a failover test, point in time you recovered to, recovery time objective. So how long did the overall task take? 1 minute, 14 seconds. And the detailed recovery steps as to what the auditors really want to see is what happened in that minute and 14 seconds. So we do a line by line every single time we touch the VM. We attach it to the right disk, we attach it to the right network port group, we re-IP it and restart it. So lightning's fast, and the great thing is you have visibility to all of these, auditor level events. So that's the failover test. And again, if you had an actual DR impact, you would do a failover live. Now, a lot of customers will ask what happens if the Zerto infrastructure is offline. That's why you have a service provider. So RapidScale can actually initiate the failover live for you if your entire infrastructure is down, because there's redundancy between the Zerto components built into the application. The only real difference between a failover test and a failover live is obviously in a failover live situation, you're declaring DR, you want the VMs, the workloads to start up and be in production at RapidScale, whereas for a failover test, you're keeping production online and you're bringing up a point-in-time copy as more of a sandbox environment. The only difference from a workflow perspective is it looks pretty much the same until you get to this screen. And the only thing you want to do here is if the VMs instantiate in RapidScale and you want to run there for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, whatever the case may be, and then you want to bring those workloads back on premise, you just click on reverse protect, and then it will automate the reprotecting of those VMs from RapidScale back on premise. And when you're ready to do the fail back to on premise, you just click failover again, and the entire process is automated for you. So that kind of caps up the demo, guys. Summer, I think there's a couple of questions on the chat, so I'm going to see what those are. One of them was around snapshots. So I guess the reason you would avoid snapshots as an application owner would be they are inherently performance affecting. So most people who use backups are using snapshots as the underlying technology. They run the backup once a day, usually out of hours, so 9, 10 o'clock at night, because they have to, meaning that if they try to run the backup at 2 o'clock in the day, they would incur so much application performance that they would do things like not use it off Exchange if they're doing it to their email server, or maybe incur such a performance degradation on their SQL servers that nobody's able to work. So that's why snapshots are inherently a bad idea. Zerto doesn't use them. We use continuous data protection, and that's why we're able to replicate in real time, as opposed to having to wait until after hours to do, a backup copy. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yep. And next, I think it'd be good for David from our end to address this one. But what is the sweet spot on the size of client as well as the smallest size client? If you can kind of speak to our sweet spot.
Yeah, this is David from RapidScale. As far as the size of the customer, it could be as little as one virtual machine all the way up to hundreds of virtual machines. There's really no limit on this one. If it's a small customer, hopefully they're looking at other cloud services as well, like hosted Exchange or something like that, to bring it together. But there's really no limit. It's a very simple product to quote out and to conceptualize even with the customer, because you talk to the customer about saying, hey, do you do backups? And yeah, we do backups to tape, we send it off site, and that's great. But then you can ask, well, what happens if your building goes down? Have you tested your disaster recovery plan with those backups? How often do you test it? A year, each time a year. And they said, well, no, we don't really test it. We'd like to. It's one of our requirements from a compliance standpoint. Well, then that's a great conversation for DR as a service, because with the Zerto solution and RapidScale, you get 2 tests a year, included with the service, no charge. So you can go back to that compliance or the auditing that you're doing and say, yeah, we test with RapidScale twice a year. Here's our results. So it's a very easy product. All we need to know is basically how much storage do you need for all those virtual machines, whether it be 500 gigabytes, 1 terabyte, and then how many virtual machines. There's a license cost for each virtual machine. But with that two pieces of information, we can put together a quick proposal. The pricing is right, and it makes sense. And then now they have a DR plan in addition to their backup plan, whatever they have for backups.
Perfect. The next one was quite long, so I'm going to try and condense it. But basically, a common objection is someone saying they already have a backup solution. How would you respond in regards to recovery to that type of objection, David?
Yeah, I'll give my thoughts on that, and then I'll hand it over to the Zerto team. But basically, backups and DR are 2 different things. So with a backup, everyone should have a a backup, right? You're backing up to a hard drive, to a tape, you give it to Iron Mountain, they take it off site. You know, nothing's changed there. And the backups are going to be important when you have, you know, a file that's been deleted, it's been 3 months now, the user's asking for it, so you have to restore from tape or something. Or, you know, ransomware, for example, encrypts the whole shared drive, and then you have to go to backups from last week to restore that. That's what you need your backups for. Now, DR is the scenario where, you know, the whole headquarters is down, your backups are destroyed too, and then even if you do have your backups because you stored them off-site, it's going to take you maybe 2, 3, or 4 days to get up and running because you have to get a server, and then you have to get a location where you're going to set up a server, because maybe you can't even get back to the site where your server room was. So Christian and Donald, what do you think about backup and DR? Two different things?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that backup is restoring the file, DR is restoring the business, right? So with backup, you know, a lot of backup products have very neat ways of restoring files into applications like Exchange, SQL, Oracle, etc., and they have a specific purpose. I would say that, you know, for Zerto, the real value add is going to be, you know, the granularity, the ease of use, and especially the RTO. So how long does it actually take to get your business back running? Whereas on the backup side of things, the RTO is going to be, you know, hours, if not days. So if you're trying to restore your business from a backup, it's going to be inherently convoluted and complicated. Whereas restoring a single file is going to be, you know, part of a workflow that those backup products are meant to do. Whereas with Zerto, restoring your business is, you know, a click of a button. So maybe Christian, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you guys covered those. Those are great answers. I really think the key there was the difference between, you know, granular, you know, restores of files and folders versus the recovery of a multi-tiered application, right? I think that's really when the major line in the sand starts coming. I would say that, you know, oddly enough, for some small SMBs, you know, if you're an SMB shop that has 5, you know, 10 virtual machines, then perhaps, you know, your backup plan can serve as a DR. But I would say for the majority of organizations out there, they are absolutely two distinct things. I would say that here at Zerto, you know, we always are very quick to acknowledge that we're an enterprise class disaster recovery business continuity platform, but we absolutely have been integrating more what I would consider backup-esque features over the last several years, right? So those lines are definitely starting to get blurred. For example, you can see with our journal here, you're not as good as your last checkpoint. You have hundreds, if not thousands of different checkpoints over 30 days, right? We have a journal file level restore. So we do also provide the ability, something we didn't touch upon here because it would have gone much over the time a lot. We also do provide the ability for file level restore. We also have some offsite backup and offsite cloning capability. So I would say that if you're talking with the customer, it may be possible that Zerto can be that single solution that meets both their DR and their backup needs, depending on their retention policies, et cetera. But typically, yeah, it's not uncommon for us to see an approach where a customer will have a backup, you know, orientated solution like a Veeam and leverage Zerto for more of a robust DR strategy. Not uncommon at all.
Perfect. And we have another one. This is more for the Zerto folks. Can Zerto replicate database servers in a consistent state?
Yeah, can of course. We actually have some collateral on our website specific to SQL, IBM DB2, and Oracle. So yeah, that's pretty much par for the course with Zerto, is the very heavy-duty, very transactional applications because of the granularity of replication. Not only do we protect the transactional SQL server or Oracle server itself, we also protect the, let's call them the database consumers, so things like the replication servers, in the same vertical protection group, so we have consistency not alone in the database, but across the VMs that consume that database as well.
Perfect. And we just got one more, and this, I believe, is the last one. This is kind of a follow-up to the backup discussion. The question is, Zerto does not replace the need for traditional backup software like TSM, Net Backup, or BackExec?
So yeah, this is David at RapidScale. Real quick, my thoughts on that is, like Christian said, there's more and more features now on Zerto where you can use it for some type of restores, you know, using the journal feature. So that's something to look into. It might not be for all customers. Here at RapidScale, we do have another service called Cloud Backup, which is basically your backup software, very similar to Net Backup or BackExec. And, you know, we always put that on servers that are in our infrastructure for the purpose of long-time archival type restores. You know, like the customer has to retain data for 7 years or something like that. We're going to use our backup, traditional backup software. However, like Christian said, there might be a case where, you know, the journal restores of Zerto is good enough for the type of restores that that customer needs, you know, which is within, like, you know, typically restores are within a couple weeks or something like that. Does that make sense, Christian? Did I get that right?
Yeah, no, it
Yeah,
absolutely
just one
does.
more
And
thing
obviously
is
our journal can cover up to 30 days, and then beyond that, with our offsite backups or offsite clones, it's definitely possible to push those workloads off for even long term. If you have a customer that has those 7-10 year retention policies, we can absolutely do that, right? So, to your point, David, I think depending on the customer's unique requirements, we definitely would love to have a conversation. Obviously, from a DR perspective, we're very confident that we're offering the best solution, but absolutely, depending on their backup requirements, we very may be able to meet those as well.
The only other thing I'd say is that, you know, Zerto is a virtual only solution. We don't support physical service. So if you still have physical service, then maybe you want to look at the TSMs, the net backups, etc.
Yeah, that's great information, guys. So basically, it's just storage. You know, if they needed to extend that journal, you know, to go back further, it's just storage that they're consuming on the RapidScale side, correct?
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. The length of the journal is basically based on two main factors: how transactional the machines are and the amount of CDP history length you want to have. So pretty straightforward. And we also have a tool that we have for that as well, a journal sizing tool, so we can help us size that out appropriately.
Excellent.
All right, well, that is the end of our questions. If you guys do end up having any other questions based on this presentation following today's webinar, feel free to shoot them over our way. We will be sending our normal follow-up email, which will include the deck and a link to today's recording. Thank you so much to Christian and Donald for joining today's call, and of course to David from joining from the RapidScale side. And thanks everyone else for joining today for the training. And have a great Wednesday. We'll talk to you all later.
Cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.